everybody, and welcome to NAW. It is National Accessibility Week, and we here at Reachability are so proud to be the provincial hosts for Nova Scotia for this great initiative. You have joined accessibility and inclusion in post-secondary education. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we are honored to work and serve on this land. Further, Reachability stands with the protesters across Canada, United States, and across the globe, demanding an end to police brutality and racism. We acknowledge the deep and powerful challenges faced by the Black community in Nova Scotia, Canada, and beyond. Welcome, everyone. I would like to thank you for coming to our panel on accessibility and inclusion in post-secondary environment in Nova Scotia, part 1. There will be a part 2 tomorrow to include a few of the other schools. So I would like to introduce you to our panelists today. First up, we have Katie Bauer. Katie is a Master's of Science student at Dalhousie University, and we have invited her today to speak on behalf and to advocate for students who are navigating post-secondary. Next up, we have, we'd like to welcome Aoife McNamara, the president of NSCAD University. Welcome. Then we have Jacqueline Cote, who's the manager accessible learning at the Jennifer Keeping Center for Accessibility at Cape Breton University. And lastly, I'd like to welcome Ian Ford, who is the accessibility resource facilitator for Acadia University. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. So I would like to, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm hoping we can sort of hop right in by getting to know each of you. Of course, I gave a title and a school that, or an institution you're affiliated with, but I'm wondering if you could, you know, each tell us for a few minutes, sort of introduce yourself and tell us what your relationship is to disability and post-secondary education. Personal, professional, up to you. Perhaps Aoife, can we begin with you? We'll go alphabetically.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I have, my relationship to this topic is lifelong, and it's an interesting one. So I'm an artist, I'm an educator, and I'm an academic leader. And I think it's interesting for me always to remember how I ended up in art school, because it's probably, if somebody met me at 15 and was to ask where I'd end up, that would probably be the very last place on their list. It was never, I was never one of those kids at school who was good at art, for example. I was okay, I could do stuff, but what I really loved was the environment of the art room. And this is really important for this topic. The art room was a place where you could set your own questions, you could pace your own learning, you could even set your own evaluation metrics. I didn't call it any of those things at the time, but that's what it was. And I felt at home there. It was also a place where you could be odd and not teased. It was this kind of retreat space. And I decided that it was just the space that I felt most comfortable in. So even though I was much better at many other things, I was much better at science, I was much better at English, all of those things, I decided that I would find a home for myself in art and design. And I bought myself a book that taught me how to draw. And I would just diligently learn, because I knew how to get into art school in Ireland. It was based on a set of drawing tests, and if you passed those, you could then do a portfolio exam and get into art school. So I mapped myself a route because I felt if I could get in there, I would feel safe and I could thrive. And that speaks to my own background, which is as a neurodiverse person on the ADD, on the autistic spectrum. So for me, that kind of space was a space that I could navigate, I could figure it out, and I wouldn't feel threatened. So that's how I ended up in art school. It's a complete surprise for me, but I think it's important because it busted for me at the very beginning the idea that art is only for people who have a natural talent. Like, you'd never tell a kid at school you can't do maths because you're not going to be a mathematician. No one would ever say that, but you still have the idea that you only do art if you're naturally talented. So the idea that creative learning or creative inquiry is only for the 3 or 5% who are going to go on to be artists is, for me, not very helpful. So for me, it's a way of learning, a way of asking questions around the world, a way of finding out, connecting ideas, and so on. And it's also a way of connecting different kinds of intellects, abilities, and sensitivities to knowledge that may not work in other environments. So it was very important for me. So that's my sort of trajectory into it. Yeah, so that's my background. Does that answer the question?
Wonderful. No, definitely, definitely. It's an open question, and I think that's a wonderful explanation of your relationship with disability and where you are right now. So
Yeah.
fantastic.
Okay.
Ian, we'll move to you. Welcome.
All right. Thank you. So my background is in social work. I'm a social worker by trade. I'm actually from Nova Scotia, and I just recently moved back last month. So in social work, when I was studying social work, my primary focus was on working with people with disabilities. And that passion, in the desire to work with people with disabilities began. I'm not actually 100% sure where it began, but it certainly flourished as I studied social work and mental health and working with people with disabilities. I went to school in Ottawa, so my primary professional life has been in Ottawa. I worked at Algonquin College for around 5 years, where I was a disability counselor and then a mental health and wellness counselor as well. I have a really strong passion to work with people with ASD. I had an opportunity to work with students in navigating the post-secondary environment, and it's just been such a wonderful, powerful experience for me. And eventually we moved back here. I moved back to Nova Scotia last month and started working as the accessibility resource facilitator here at Acadia. So that's basically my background of why I'm.
Great. Thank you, Ian. Jacqueline.
Okay. So I'm also a person with disabilities, and it was interesting that Pippa brought up, and I hope I'm saying your name right, that she brought up the art room because it was music, and I hadn't even planned on talking about it. But interestingly, I don't know. I grew up in the Dartmouth school system at the time, and don't know if I would have made it all the way through school if it wasn't for our fantastic music program that we had. I was in a recorder group that, it wasn't just the little piano recorders. I played a big piano recorder. I still play a piano recorder. I was in band. I was in more than one choir. It kept me. I usually had a music thing at least 4 times a week on lunchtime. So it was like, well, darn it, I guess I can't fake sick and not go to school, because school was not a happy place for me because I'm a person with ADHD and a learning disability that was completely unrecognized and unaccommodated at the time. I also now have, and even at that age, I developed rheumatoid arthritis. So, I had some physical disabilities too that, again, people don't really get. As older in gym, really like that. But in music, I was always accepted and that I was good at, not fantastic, but good. I have professional musicians in my family, I'm not one of them, but so that sort of came up.
We're cutting out a little bit, Jacqueline, which is, the nature of this
Can you
stuff.
hear me now?
So if I'm looking, like I'm listening really hard, it's just there's a little bit of breaking up, but hopefully that will pass.
Okay, good. Can you hear me now, though?
Yes.
Okay. So with that experience that I had through school, I was always really interested in working with students who had disabilities, but kind of got steered away from it at times. Teachers weren't getting jobs and that sort of thing when I was in university. And then I ended up in computer applications, and kind of a little bit of a revelation. My dad had dyslexia, I had a learning disability as well. So I had learned to accommodate things sort of naturally. And I had somebody who was taking it was an 8 computer applications class that included a certificate recognized in health authority. And this one fellow said to me at the end, there was a test, and he said, thank you so much for this, but I won't be writing the test. I'm not very smart. I'm not good at school. And I said, well, tell me what you mean. I said, I'm doing great. And anyway, it turned out he needed me to read the questions. So I just talked to him a bit, and I read the questions to him. And from that moment on, I went, no, this is what I want to do. Like it was so good to be able to accommodate that. And he appreciated that so much. And he actually realized from that, he got the highest mark in class. So he was so appreciative of learning that that he was smart, that wasn't really his reality. So that was part of what led me into this myself. I was told when I was in high school, oh dear, don't worry about university, that's far too hard to do.
Yeah.
So, and then I went on from there, from that experience. I went, I really don't want to work in IT forever, doing just computer applications. What I'd like to do is work with people with disabilities. I did have an aptitude for software and technology. So that was when I pursued my master's degree. And I did a master's of integrated studies. And in that, I did kind of like a double major, only in the master's, and I did education and community studies. But everything I did was all around disability.
Yeah.
And I took learning disability courses and assistive tech, and even the courses that weren't specifically about disability. All my papers I wrote were about disability. That was kind of how I came around to it. And then it took a little while, but I eventually worked my way into the position I have now. And on the side, I tutored students who had disabilities just so that I could, do my regular job, pay the bills, but still work with students the way I would like.
Excellent. Lovely. Thank you. Katie, can you tell us a little bit about why we would have invited you here?
Well, I have been through quite a bit of school as a student with a disability. I do have a psychiatric disability, which is rather severe. So going through 3 different Nova Scotia universities now. I went to NASCAD originally and graduated from there, and then I went to the Mount St. Vincent. And now I'm at Dalhousie as a Master's of Science student. So I have a different perspective that is well informed from different approaches towards accommodations in the province because they're not all the same. And also, I think I can add quite a bit in terms of knowledge of policy from a student perspective. So I did work for Students Nova Scotia for about 3 years, and I wrote a policy paper there called Disable the Label, which was about just policy in academic institutions or post-secondary education across the province, and basically what we thought was going really well and what we thought maybe could be changed or could be updated. And so I have a bit of that background, but I also kind of talk about my own personal experiences going through. So basically, I think I'm here to offer some opinions and some advice and some perspective from someone who's gone through it. Especially, I think now with the mental health diagnosis, it's not as well established in accommodation policy. So it's a bit more up in the air for people who are transitioning from high school. So I think hopefully I'll be able to fill in some gaps there.
Wonderful, thank you. And that is, I think, in terms of people who work in areas such as ours, you know, just what Katie alluded to, you're never it's never done. It's always changing. It's always growing. There's always learning to be done. So, you know, it's constantly you know, a game of trying to stay on top of needs and learning about new accommodations. I realized I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Deborah Wells-Hopi. I'm a facilitator at Reachability Association. However, I have a background in public relations and journalism, but when I ended up eventually, and a background in working with individuals with disabilities, but then I ended up in, you know, in teaching at post-secondary level, realized I love teaching, so went on to do a master's, and now I'm partway through my PhD in education, concentration in lifelong learning. I also have an adult child with a disability and have, you know, help that individual navigate their way through various systems. So that is my interest, and that is why I'm here today hosting. And again, I want to thank everyone so much, and thank you for giving us a glimpse into a little bit of your lives while you're here. So I was wondering if maybe, Aoife, we could start with you and then move on to Ian and Jacqueline. If maybe you could, because I also want to mention that unfortunately we're not going to be able to cover comprehensively all the services available at each of the, in terms of disability and accessibility and inclusion services at each institution. However, so I thought maybe we could, in order to give people a glimpse of what may be available and know where to begin to ask questions, starting with Aoife, you can highlight, you know, a particular initiative or something that you're particularly excited about currently in terms of what's going on at NSCAD.
I'd love to.
Thank you.
Because I'd love to, because I think we're at I know we're at a moment in NSCAD where we're looking fundamentally at just even the very idea of what an accommodation means. And that's what I'd just like to talk about very briefly. But if you take it from we're an art and design school. So this is our business. Our business is the business of design and the business of inclusive design. And if you think of what's happening in the world around us right now, we see what happens when we don't take that seriously. You know, we have these systemic problems, whether it's racism, and disability, where we don't look at inclusion, we miss out, we deny our society the talents and contributions of so many people, and we all suffer in ways that are just, you know, unacceptable for so many profound ways, right? So if you look at that in the context of a university and think about the idea of accommodation, we really should never have to think about accommodation, is my position. So I'm really inviting, working with our colleagues at NASCAD, we're inviting everyone to look at the principles of inclusive design and asking, how do we design our programs, our classes, our curriculum, our facilities, everything, so that everyone can thrive, so that there are different ways of achieving learning outcomes. So that it's not, the onus isn't on the student to have to come and get an accommodation, so that there isn't one norm. And then if you don't meet that norm, it's your problem. So why is it that there is one standard? And if you don't meet the standard, you are the problem. And then we have to fix it for you. So rather than do that, we're going to reverse engineer it and say, okay, well, what is it that this course is about? What is it that we would like you to learn? What are the outcomes of this? And how can that outcome be manifested? What are the different ways you can demonstrate that? And there are many different ways of demonstrating those things. And does it have to be demonstrated in 10 weeks or in 3 weeks, or in how can you demonstrate it over time so that many different people can participate, thrive, and contribute to the world in ways that we so desperately need? So we're looking at it that way. It's almost like flipping it over. Should we ever need accommodation if we look at it in a much more inclusive design, or through a much more inclusive design perspective? And actually COVID has, despite all of the extraordinary stresses that's brought to us, through the work that we've been doing with instructional designers and the imagination of our students and faculty and staff, we've been able to think too about the ways in which technologies that we've kind of avoided using can actually help that project, not replace things that we do, but that can help make things more, offer different routes, or 6 ways of achieving a learning outcome instead of 1, can have, allow you achieve things in your own time instead of at my timetable, in my way, in my building, at this time. So those are that's the invitation I'm putting out to my colleagues, is to just think really differently right now about this, so that it's not, so that we are not framing everyone with a disability as someone with a problem NASCAD has to solve. Does that?
Wonderful.
So that's really what we're trying to think about.
We actually have a comment from one of our viewers who says, seeing disability as a problem is a systemic barrier to inclusion across so many platforms. It is a great approach to shift that perspective. So thank you.
Thank you for that comment, yeah.
Ian,
right.
Anything particular you'd like to highlight that you're excited about going on at Acadia?
Absolutely. And actually, the first thing I'd like to highlight is just, being new to Acadia, we have a wonderful team at Accessible Learning who have done amazing work to really touch on I think what that comment was about, systemic barriers to inclusion across so many platforms. So the idea that students, and like you were saying before, the idea that students have to get a specific accommodation, or there's a special accommodation, and the reality is that there, inclusion is really what we need. And as I was saying, we have such a wonderful team at Acadia who are dedicated to really framing the issue as inclusion, to ensuring that there's seamless transition for new students, and as well, students who come can sort of just seamlessly learn the way that they best learn, and that's really what we want to do at Acadia. One aspect of that is the marvelous workshops that I know they've put so much time into developing for students. So it's one thing for the accommodations, but to have that sort of one-on-one or groups of people come together to learn, and again, not just learn, but learn in the way that best serves them, the best possible way for the individual student. And I also want to echo, what the current situation has sort of highlighted. Although there's so many trials that we've been going through with COVID, one thing that it does highlight is a need for universal design and learning. And so having that conversation, what does that look like in terms of again, making it about inclusion and uh, and making a classroom open to all kinds of learning, all kinds of people, wherever they may come from. So yeah, I'm just very excited to be starting at Acadia and really, going forward with the agenda of inclusion and UDL, and yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think we have someone that's, I want to say, a little Hallie famous that may have asked us a question here. Will Brewer. His question is, if he is in, for instance, he's in a diverse Down syndrome culture, and he was curious about what kind of resources that would be, that what kind of systemic barriers do you feel could be best dismantled in terms of, so I guess we're sort of speaking in regard to the those that fall under the umbrella of more of a cognitive disability.
Can I answer
Yes,
that?
please.
I'm just so excited. I've just something very exciting to say about that. That is a perfect example. There are two young women who are trailblazing the way into higher education for so many people in my field. I'm sure it's happening in other fields, but there's a young woman about to graduate in textile design at Goldsmiths College, University of London this year, which is one of the most prestigious programs in the world in that area, and she's Downs. And there's a young woman has just graduated from one of the most prestigious photography programs in the United States at CalArts, just maybe 3 weeks ago, and she's also got Down syndrome. And these are examples of the opportunities. They're both examples of huge success by these individual artists, but they're also reminders to the rest of us of the ways in which we squander talent when we don't look at ways to include diverse learners in our programs. So these people they haven't had accommodations. They've had the opportunity to demonstrate learning outcomes at paces and in environments that work for them. And these are wonderful case studies. So,
Yes.
And I think this is the other challenge that we have to meet. It is we need to stop thinking of ourselves as doing people favors and start understanding the ways in which opening our programs and opportunities to diverse learners is helping us become more interesting, more rich environments that are creating new knowledge and understanding for all of us. And I'm super excited, and I'm happy to share links to those successes if people would be interested in it. Those are totally inspiring.
Yes, I'll be following up with you about that, and then we can share that on our using our resources. Thank you. Jacqueline, anything happening at Cape Breton University you'd like to tell us about that you're particularly pumped about these days?
Well, I was trying to think of which thing I would talk about, but since we were talking about inclusion, now we have a program for students who have intellectual or developmental disabilities who wouldn't be eligible for credit study. So a little different than graduating in programs with the sports that we were talking about, or with universal design, making sports not so much a need because it's already built in. But this program is an participatory audit, and Acadia and Mount St. Vincent also have inclusive post-secondary education programs as well. But CVU started just last year, and it's been very, very successful and very good for the students that are involved. We've had amazing response from the faculty. It was interesting because it's a participatory audit, and usually when we talk about auditing classes, you're supposed to go to class and you kind of sit there and you just sit in the class, you don't do assignments and you don't rate tests. And you kind of sit there and you stay quiet and then you leave. But with the participatory audit, students go to class, they participate fully with the other students, They can do assignments that are classified or not, or whatever works for them. We have an inclusive program coordinator, the profs and students and all of that. We have peer mentors and peer tutors. So they would be people who are actually in the student class, if at all possible. And they work with the students, and there's bonding that goes on, and friendships that are made. And the students also not only participate fully in the class, but participate fully in student life. So if they need a mentor to go with them, we'll have a peer mentor that attend different events on campus, some that are off campus, that are university connected. It's been really positive for everybody involved.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Katie, maybe we can switch gears a little bit, and maybe you can, try and condense or highlight something. I'd like to hear about a good experience or something that you you don't have to. You've been to several universities in town. You don't have to say which one, but maybe you can talk about a positive, something that really you found was key in meeting that anything that you needed in particular.
Yeah, I'd say actually, and I will say the school was at NASCAD when I first got diagnosed. I was completely unaware that the resources even existed, and just the location of the office was right in with the registrar and that sort of
finance.
So I saw Bill just standing there, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I qualify. I should talk to him. And he brought me in, and he gave me all kinds of resources. He was very, very nice and helpful that way, but he also was very much an advocate for me to be an advocate for myself. And I think that's something I really took from him moving forward. I've had different experiences with profs at various universities where they haven't quite got the accommodation thing down, or it's the first time they've dealt with someone with accommodations. And there's only so much that the office can do themselves without bringing in some element of self-advocacy, I think, because you're going to need that once you graduate. And just having that experience early on in my academic career, I guess, was very helpful for me moving forward. And I think it's very helpful now, even in graduate school, especially.
Okay, so support for you to self-advocate, is the support in learning tools and confidence and things like that in order to in order to advocate for oneself. Yeah.
So basically, like picking up the language and just knowing, you can go try it, and if it doesn't work, there's somebody behind you. And I think that's true at all schools that I've been to. Like it's very much an idea that you can go and have the discussion with the professor, or you cannot, depending on your comfortable level.
Yeah.
But because I had that initial experience at NASCAD, which is quite a small school, I was very confident going into those discussions later on in life. So I think that was, probably a really good experience that I've had so far.
Excellent. Thank you. We just have another comment. It says universities have a unique position to teach people with disabilities the power of self-advocacy. Exactly what you were saying, Katie. The skill and experience creates empowerment for lifelong skills. So that's an excellent element to, as those who work in post-secondary, get to impart that a whole skill set as well as to assist in navigation. So, in general, each university or each college has a, the department and, an office for their, accessibility services or inclusive services, or, there may be a variety of supports and, programs offered. So I'm curious if there's anything in particular, and we'll switch it up. We'll start with Ian and go the other way, or actually we'll start with Jacqueline, sorry, and go the other way this time. But I'm curious if there's a particular sort of like little gem that you have at your school that you feel would be, that is maybe underutilized, or people may not realize that they have access to, or maybe it's open to a wider variety of people than people realize, or people think, oh, that's not for me, that, I don't qualify.
Wow, I think there's a whole bunch of things in there. One thing that you kind of mentioned is the idea that we have a center. So we have a full center. It's not an office. Some people come and eat their lunch there, that sort of thing. It looks like a computer lab. We have a lot of computers there that people can use, and but it's definitely a very good for a lot of our students. But it is underutilized. I still get people who sort of fetch up fourth year, and they come to me and they're in tears. They're really stressed, and their marks may have suffered, and they're worried they're not going to get into grad school and that sort of thing because they didn't think that it applied to them. And it wasn't until they got the stress that maybe they talked to a prof and they guided to the teacher that I see them. I try to get the word out, and we've grown so much in the last 2 years since I went from 100 students to we're over 240 now in fellowship. So we took a leap, but there's still so many students out there that aren't getting the message, that don't know what applies to them. So that's one of the main things. I want to get that word out. And the other one is the students who do come, and especially around assistive technology. Students will.
I'm sorry, did you say assistive technology?
Yeah, around their assistive tech, they receive their assistive tech, but they don't really know how to use it. And because they're not quite sure how to use it, they don't. And it doesn't help you if you don't use it. And we've even done training sessions for tech. And like one particular training session we did, one person showed up.
Yeah.
So it's using the resources that are there. Like, I'm really happy to help people out, and making use of the tools that are there. I really want to help people do that.
And some of that can lead back to what you were first saying regarding anxiety and, sometimes anxiety around using assistive tech devices, or something we don't know how to use, or, can keep us from, we get stuck a little bit. So it might be sort of, combining both the ideas of like learning the hard skills of how to use this assistive technology, and also managing the stress and apprehension around that. Okay, somebody online says it seems much better when. Okay, Jacqueline, if you can lean in a little bit like you were at the end in terms of the sound cutting out. Must be because you're across the causeway. Right. Katie, I'm wondering if maybe you can mention something that you think, I'm just curious, do you have any comments about what I was just saying about the assistive technology, or what Jacqueline was saying about anxiety and stress, and being able to, people think, oh, well, those services aren't for me. I just have anxiety and stress, right?
Yeah, I think, I think a lot of it happens, there's overlap between the programs that are offered through things like health and wellness, or even the student union's office, that could be integrated into the disability or accessibility services, that one could be promoting the other, and they could be doing programs together, I think would be really helpful. just in terms of getting people to know that the office exists, you know, that maybe they also touch on these particular areas, and maybe it's not just stress, or maybe you've gotten a diagnosis recently and, you know, it's overwhelming, or it explains some of your previous symptoms or behaviors that affected your school. And so a lot of what ends up happening, at least with the people that I know, is they end up going to counseling or using that resource to the school, but they're not getting told that they also qualify for some of these other resources that are put on through accessibility services and things like that. So I think a lot of it is really a translation error, because for a long time it was called disability services. At some places it still is. Provincially it still is. And people don't necessarily think I have a disability. They think, you know, I don't have it hard enough, or it's not like my label is not a disability label, so I'm not going to use those services. And I think that's still a barrier we're trying to overcome. And the best way to do that is simply by partnering with people, I think would be really helpful.
Lovely. Thank you. Ian, something that you feel is maybe an underutilized resource that you've seen in your experience, or something you wish people knew about?
Yeah. Well, I actually just want to start by reiterating what Katie just said about the idea that mental health somehow doesn't get included as valid or as something you can get accessible services for. And you know, that's sort of my entire career. That has sort of been a theme, and a really frustrating theme in post-secondary, where you go to one service and you're not told about the other service. You go to counseling, you're not told about the accessibility department because of, you know, for whatever reason. But you know, what I think comes down to is stigma. The stigma of mental health, the stigma of accessibility, the stigma of disability. And that is antithetical to inclusion. And I think that it's so important that we address that issue, because it's, you know, if we want to build strong learning environments like we're all dedicated to, we really need to address that stigma. So I just want to start by saying that at Acadia, I think what I would want students to really see, and what I would like to highlight to students, is just the people in the accessible learning office and in counseling, and that they're there to listen, and they're there to figure out and problem solve with the student. And it's very, you know, it's a very small school, a relatively small team, but they're there to help students, and they do an awesome job, and they're extremely dedicated. So, but again, it goes back to the idea that students need to know this stuff, and then on top of knowing it, they need to feel comfortable. Just because you have a disability or a mental health issue or whatever it is, you still have access to this great education, and it shouldn't be seen as a diminishing, or it shouldn't be seen as so negative as it often is. And I like to think that that's changing and shifting, as you know, we're all trying our best, I think, to change that culture. But yeah, and again, being at Acadia, small school, great team who really want to have this dialogue with students. Actually, one other thing I would also highlight is the importance of engaging not only with students but also with faculty, because a lot of that stigma sometimes is in the faculty, and sometimes there's just a little bit of education about what it means to have a disability. You know, people have very strange ideas of what it means to have a learning disability or any kind of disability, and it's, you know, sometimes just a little bit of education goes a long way.
Yeah, for everyone, no matter how educated you are.
Yeah, no, that's true.
I just want to move. I see some things coming in from YouTube and places afar. And that maybe, Aoife, you might want to respond to. Christy from YouTube says, ensuring those who are hired to work with students with disabilities do not possess conscious or subconscious biases. Experiencing this, or experiencing individuals who have a bias is minimizing for students. And then we had a second person really like that comment and would like to know if there's any screening processes currently in place for this. So I think it's to ensure that there's advocates working to advocate.
I love that question, and I'm really glad that whoever's posted that has taken the time to ask it. And so to your, and I'm going to mix that with your question. So
yes,
at the moment, quickly say what I haven't been in NASCAD that long. I'm a little bit like Ian in that respect. I'm longer than you are, but it's coming on 9 months for me here. So I'm still learning. The gem that I've found more than anything else at NASCAD so far within this regard would certainly be the peer mentor program that's run by students. I think they do really good work, and it's getting better all the time. Incredibly impressive, I have to say. The earnestness, the seriousness, everything that it goes into that, and the people who do it, incredibly good. So that's a gem, and I don't think we celebrate it as much as we should, and we need to invest more in it. But I'm going to circle back to the other question. We're setting, and I'm going to answer it this way, what we're looking at is exactly that issue. So what we want to think about is whose responsibility is education. And I don't actually think it's a little education. I think it's a profound amount of education that's needed. I think that if we are going to talk about whether it's universal design for learning or inclusive design, then we really need to be very serious about understanding what are the core competencies that everybody needs to have if that's going to work. So I don't think they just sit in a disability office. I think they sit with faculty. I think they sit with security guards. I think they sit with the person in the finance office. I think all of us, with me, every single person needs to have core competencies in relation to whether it's race and disability and all of these, because we can't be there without them. Because the minute somebody encounters somebody who doesn't understand, a student encounters someone who doesn't have those core competencies, years of work can be set back. So it can't just sit in that disability office. That work has to be spread across all of our job descriptions. We need to know what that is, and all of us need to take that responsibility on. And so when those questions come in out of YouTube about screening, yes, we need to be much better at it, and it needs to go from cleaners to president. It needs to be embedded in every one of our job descriptions, and it needs to be part of our annual performance evaluations. We need to be measured against those things, not just a one-off. You passed it when you got hired, but that needs to be evaluated all of the time. And it's extraordinarily serious, because I just can't imagine how we're going to get better unless we all do that work. It's too easy to say, I'm going to hire someone and they'll do that work. I don't have to think about it. And I'll hope that Professor X or Accountant Y or President G will take their time, if they fancy it, to learn. It can't be optional. It must be core to their job. That's I know I sound very vociferous, but I think it's non-negotiable.
No, I'm just smiling because in the YouTube comments, somebody says, go Aoife. Societal problem, i.e. social creation of disability, must have holistic approach in order to create cultural change.
Yeah, we need to start liking each. I think it's about we need to start liking each other. So we need to. That's
a longer panel.
But we need to have a basic expectation that everyone who walks in the door can be treated well. And that should be a normal part. You shouldn't be hired unless you can deliver on that basic thing. You shouldn't have a job.
Oh, and our actually April Hubbard, who is our ambassador this week for NA, just commented after hearing Aoife say this, she wants to attend NASCAD. So. That's great.
Tell her there's a difference between aspiration and action. We have to
Well, you know, if we
it's a work in progress, April.
if we can't imagine it, it will never happen, right?
And we've got great people, like, you know, we're all, and it's not just NASCA, like none of this happens, it's everyone, it's
Yeah.
CBU, it's Acadia, it's all of
got to
us.
be cultural.
It's an ecosystem, right?
So, yes, so we have another comment. It says much more interesting and important work and learning can't start until we break down the barriers. So I want to move. I had two questions that were submitted previous to today, people knowing that we were going to be having this discussion. And one, Jacqueline, you you touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's asking what supports you offer in terms of emotional or psychological supports. And in this regard, I'm not talking about that as being the disability. In fact, there is no disability about being, distressed or anxious about the work it takes to advocate for yourself, compounded by the stress of post-secondary life in general. So they were just wondering, they say it's exhausting being an advocate for oneself, and how can you help with that,
So I guess part of us having the center that we do, I think that really helps with that, especially with that fatigue of dealing with your disability and advocating on your behalf, regularly, and just like the extra work that can go into having a disability in the first place. When they come to our center, it's where you can let it all hang out, like, to use an old phrase. Like, you don't have to be putting on a front. You can talk about, this went badly, and what have you done in this case? And people, like, I see a lot of students helping each other in the center. We've had some students who are a little more reserved, and really outgoing students who draw those students out. There's just so much that goes on in the interaction between the students, and the interaction that just sort of happens. And I forgot to lean forward. And the interaction the interaction that goes on with the staff members that are there. So our center is a big open space, and we usually have two people at one desk and another two people at another. And then there's a little office in the back where I am to have, like, private appointments. But I'm also, in and out all the time and around, and the students get to really know us. So they talk to us and conversations happen, and, just the, how to deal with that kind of stress sort of happens in that way. But we also have counseling services, and we're also really, open about, like, hey, like, maybe you want to talk to a counselor about that, and people are open, like, they'll say, oh yeah, I went to the counselor and they were super helpful, and that sort of thing happens, and I think that really makes a big difference.
Good. Thank you. And you sound good.
Thanks.
Ian, can you tell us, what advice do you give people that are just exhausted from fighting the good fight? It is emotionally draining and physically draining and all those things to constantly have to advocate for yourself. So yeah, tell us a little bit.
Yeah, I want to start by saying it's a shame that anyone is put in that position. I think it's really important to acknowledge that they should not come into a post-secondary environment and be forced to explain yourself to a professor. And that unfortunately does happen. And it's a shame, and it's exhausting. It's painful, and it's draining. And what I would say, is, unfortunately, all I can say is hang in there. Hopefully there are good counselors. Hopefully there are good accessibility staff. And hopefully good professors. We were talking earlier about everyone needs to have this education. The reason everyone needs to have education on accessibility is so that individual students, vulnerable students, are not put in position where they have to be self-advocates all the time. You should not have to beg for accommodations. You should not have to wonder whether or not you qualify for a specific accommodation. It should be, a given as it comes up. What I would say to students is try and find those people in your institution who can take that burden off of you, and they should be there, whether it's the accessibility office or counseling office or some good professors. But yeah, it's just a shame that the self-advocacy is so necessary.
Thank you. Katie, can you speak a little bit to how to best manage the exhaustion that comes along with advocacy?
Yeah, I think just to build on what Ian was just saying, a lot of it is knowing, not just part of self-advocacy is knowing when to lean on other people and when there should be other people doing this part for you. And a lot of that is knowing, that the accessibility office exists and the programs that they offer. So a lot of it for me personally came down to preparing myself when I wasn't stressed. So like before I entered Dalhousie, I had a summer free and I got in contact with disability services then. I signed up then for most of that stuff in advance. Same with Mount St. Vincent. And I was able to then have everything in place and know it was in place. And then when I ran into a professor that wasn't so up to date, let's say, on accessibility services, I was able to just call in backup and say, I've tried, I've done my piece, and now I'm going to bring in the people to represent me because that's what they're there for. And, let them have this battle. And it really comes down to the fact that, actually, to touch on a previous question about the screening of candidates who work in this position, I do know, due to the funding through the labor market and other things for the position, a lot of people are hired with varying backgrounds. And I think it all comes down to the fact that people that gravitate to this work are people who have really big hearts and are really trying to help you. So when you come into that position and you know them and they know your name and you can just call them up and say, such and such is not giving me my extended timelines and it's really stressing me out and I can't deal with this. They will step in and call them out for you. And I think that's a big part of school in general for people with disabilities, is knowing when and where they have to self-advocate and when and where they can give that burden to someone else.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Thank you. Aoife, do you have anything you'd like to say about the supports of mental and physical exhaustion from advocating for oneself?
I do. I think I have three things. I was writing notes. I think I have three things. The first one is that I want to move into Jacqueline's office. That sounds a really nice place to be. So yeah, that would be really nice. It sounds perfect. The second one is that I think that it is absolutely essential to have to make sure that students have access to professional services that they need, and that should be really clearly signposted and it must be there. But the third point is fundamental to me, which is that there is a problem. Something is structurally and systemically wrong when university makes people sick. So, and I whether it's as a person working in the university or as a student, if what's going on, if the way we organize things, if how we learn, if how we work makes people sick, then we're not doing it right. So for me, that's a design challenge. So I am not inclined to put my resources on putting band-aids on a broken system. I'm much more inclined to thinking, let's try and do it better, because I don't want to keep making people sick. And I know that I am so exhausted with having to go to work and to pretend to be a different kind of person than I am. Because if I don't, if I'm actually behave like I am, if I act the way I should act, then I just get dismissed as being too weird or too cookie or too, and I don't get taken seriously. So I have to fake. I have to spend my whole time faking, and I'm exhausted.
That's
and I can't even
exhausting.
work properly. So I know what it's like. I've done that. And most people who know me, their biggest mystery in life is, how on earth have you got that job? And they've been saying that to me for 20 years because they know how much faking is involved. Like, how do I actually hold myself together to act as if I am? And I do, and it takes a toll. I'm super cranky to my family. I'm all of those other things, because by the time I get home, I don't want to speak to a living being. And that's not correct. That is another way of creating barriers for people. And I see it with students.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Jacqueline. So I think, yes, of course, everybody should have access to mental health services and all of those things, but no way on earth we should be setting things up so students have to fake and have to have advocates. If that's where it comes to the competencies, we shouldn't be doing our job if we have to be begged to do our job.
Yes.
We should have the competencies to know how to do our job.
Well said. Thank you. Jacqueline, did something resonate with you?
Yes. So all my life, I've been the person who talked too much. So I go to meetings, like, and I'm like, oh, don't talk too much. Like, try and like tone it down a little, like, so I get the faking it bit. The great thing about my job is I don't have to fake it with students. And when you do fake it with students, they know it. And that's the lovely part, is I am myself. They know who I am. They know I have my own challenges. A couple of them have been more vocal about themselves because I'm sort of out there as who I am with them. So I think sometimes that makes a difference, like just being able to show the students who you are, and and also, like, here I am, I have a responsible job. I'm, I made it through university, through 2 degrees even. And it's possible.
Yes.
So I think sometimes that helps, is just like sometimes to be able to be your authentic self, but sometimes not in meetings with like all the the higher up people. I have to like tone it down a notch.
Especially with me, it had to be very toned down with me, Jacqueline.
And I very much, when I was teaching in the post-secondary environment, my student, and even clients that I still have during my facilitations, when I mentioned that, I did grade 12 3 times before I finally got through it, the disbelief, and and then I say, and now I'm on my 4th university degree. So, I hear what you're saying. Definitely 100%. There's another question that I wanted to get to. And this is, maybe Ian, we can start with you. This is from an individual who was going to University of Toronto and has transferred to Halifax. She's found quite a difference in terms of the level to which the faculty are required to adhere to accessibility plans. And she'd like to know, does your particular institution that you're representing have anything in place that may put some teeth into an accessibility plan should a faculty member choose not to participate or acknowledge? What kind of recourse does the student have? Oh, mute.
Sorry. Me?
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay. Okay. That's great. I also just transferred to a school from Ontario, so it works out. I think sort of the boring answer, I think, comes down to Ontario has the AODA, and it's been in place for a long time. The AODA is the Accessibility Act for Ontarians with Disabilities. Nova Scotia adopted the Accessibility Act in 2017. So I think what happened is that because Ontario has had it longer, the education portion of that act has made the rules strict. So in terms of the professors actually have to follow this, when I was a disability counselor, one of the joys of my job was saying to professors that you actually don't have a choice to do this. The assessment's been done. It's, and I could say that on behalf of the student, and again, not have to have the student advocate for themselves. The good news is I think that we are moving towards that here as well, and I think that making that clear, again, going back to the education piece, explaining to faculty and staff at universities and colleges that this isn't an option. This is a right. Students with disabilities have a right to access accommodations. And so at Acadia, dialogue with professors, again, so that we can get it out of the way so that the student doesn't have to do the advocacy. It should never be that the student comes and says, oh, the professor didn't let me do X, Y, Z, even though it's in the accessibility plan. Or, if a student feels like they have to disclose a specific diagnosis, which is totally unfortunate if a student ever thinks they have to disclose to a professor. So I'm not sure that I can give a direct answer to the question per se, but working on that education piece and starting to frame this as not some extra thing that a student gets. It's a right. Accessibility is a right in the classroom. So
thank you for that, Ian. Katie, any thoughts on the inevitable tension of advocacy and dealing with faculty?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts actually. So I think one of the major problems is faculty education, as Ian was mentioning. Like it's not getting through. There's been a study at UPEI that basically said they don't feel comfortable teaching people with severe disabilities. They interchange intellectual disabilities with learning disabilities. They don't necessarily know the difference, things like that. So you definitely don't feel comfortable telling them necessarily like what thing is happening.
I'm detecting a theme here, but yeah.
A lot of them push for it. A lot of people obviously come like, oh, no, you don't need to tell me. Like, that's not part of the agreement, and they know what's going on. But a lot of people are like, well, you were fine last week. What are you saying now that you need this magical disability to come out of nowhere to make it so you don't have to write this exam? And it's, I've always been able to connect with someone in a accessibility services office and have them come through for me. But a lot of it, if you don't have those connections set up, if you don't know those resources are available, it's very intimidating. And it's something I've gotten into a lot of fights over personally, just like I won't back down. And a lot of students do. And I think a lot of what needs to happen, obviously we're really working towards this universal design idea, and it's what should and needs to happen eventually, but we're stuck in this in-between period where like we have these lofty goals, but we're still stuck in a system that is not prepared to make that adjustment. So I think a lot of it comes down to trying to figure out your way to take the accessible social model and teach that to faculty and make them understand like they are part of the system in this case. Like they're not just individual people. They need to work as part of the university sometimes. And I've had some times when I really couldn't get through that myself. And I am someone who obviously am quite vocal. So I do think that is like a very touchy point, especially even when you come in with accommodation resources. You also face some problems sometimes with the actual person who regulates your accommodations. Like when I did interviews for the paper, a lot of people said, well, you know, they'll come in shooting for the moon, the sun, and the stars, and you have to like limit it down. And that's kind of stuck with me because we don't have any appeals process for what accommodations are accepted versus what aren't. So I think that's something that we could really look into, or in terms of just accessibility and inclusion, like not to say anybody's at fault necessarily, because maybe there is sometimes when they're, you know, you meet the person and they clearly don't need this recommendation that was made in high school. But there's other times when that can be taken away from you, but you really know that you need that or you will need that in the future. And there's no way to get that into your accommodations agreement if the person making it doesn't put it there. So I think that's really the starting point before you even get to faculty, is to really adjust that process.
Yeah, good. I appreciate the you know, you being candid and honest. So I'm just curious here. I'm trying to talk with you guys. Have some questions over here, some questions over here. We're all navigating this new world. So Mabel, you know, is alluding to how, you know, there are certain, the nature of academia can be, you know, traditionally very not as open to those who are not, you know, that may express themselves differently or present with a disability, or you know, this sounds like an IFA question coming, but she was wondering if anyone could speak to a way that we are helping people with disabilities, you know, cut through that, I guess, you know, I want to say the academic bull crap, and begin navigating the systems and creating awareness about resources that exist, and, you know, making it, is it really possible that people with disabilities can succeed in this environment at all? Do you feel?
Yes.
Can you take that on, Aoife?
I think, yeah.
That's a big question.
Well, there's loads of answers to it as well, and we'll never
Yeah.
get to it now. I'm going to start a little bit back with where we left off just at the last question, but I think that it does come back to competencies too. It depends on how do you measure, say, faculty success? And if faculty success isn't measured against some of these metrics, then we won't get there. But we can begin to change that, and faculty want it. It's not like faculty aren't interested in these things. Of course they are, but we need to put those frameworks in place. We need to work with faculty to ask these questions, to redesign that with them. So what does success look like for you? And what are the competencies that a 21st century academic needs? That, like, you know, it isn't 17th century Italy. It is 21st century Canada. So it's a different type of world. So in there, so can we set things up? Can people be different and succeed? Absolutely. I gave you those two examples of these extraordinary, groundbreaking young women who are succeeding in some of the most competitive academic environments in the world earlier on today. There are ways of doing it, but it does mean thinking differently. It means identifying like, what is it that people are trying to learn? What is the outcome? And allowing people chart their own path to that outcome. It means letting go of preconceptions about like things that we use, we just drop everyday language, like the person isn't acting professional, or they're not, you know, all of these types. It means challenging all of those types of things and letting go of them. It means coming together to reimagine what a normative behavior is and why do you ever need it anyway. So but if we're willing to do that work, and that's across all these other axes of difference, it's disability is one, but we know all of the others. So if we want to do that, of course we can do it. And will we all benefit? Of course we'll all benefit. Everybody will benefit from this work. So absolutely 100%. Is it hard? Yes. But if everybody does it, it's the same thing. It's like racism isn't a black problem. Disability isn't the disabled student's problem. It isn't the people with disability. It's everybody's problem. So if everybody commits to making this work, we can do it. But we can't exhaust everybody. You know, students shouldn't have to be. I know the standard. I know everyone gets told you have to learn how to be your own advocate. Why? Why?
Yeah.
You're there to be a student.
Oh,
you don't have to be.
Clap from Jacqueline.
No, you don't really have to be. I really do challenge it. I don't think that's fair. So you have to be your own advocate plus do everything else. That's an unreasonable extra set of expectations. That is the reality, but that is the very basis of a discriminatory system. So
well, you know, and then so we have these, and it's sort of what Katie was saying about, you know, we have goals, we have, you know, ideals that we need to work towards. But then just to sort of bring us back to the ground for a minute, Will Brewer, once again, has commented, and he's given a great comment, and he simply says, at his school where he attends, a local university, we're all for accessibility. However, there's a building that doesn't have a wheelchair ramp going upstairs.
Oh, well, so, good God. We have toilets that you can't get in. It's a huge, all of those problems. But those, again, are where there's a will, there's a way. If we commit to making changes, we can do those things. But there has to be a commitment to it. That's absolutely surmountable. All of those things, it's bricks and mortar. If we wanted to do those things, we would do them.
Yes.
Those are not things we can't. We can absolutely change those things. There's, you know, we can collectively decide. There's ways of thinking about our built environment. There's ways of thinking about sharing resources so it's less expensive. Do we need to duplicate X number of boardrooms? Can we share things? Then we would have less of those, less accessibility stuff to do. There's many ways of thinking about it differently that would make it possible. But just back one last thing about accountability. So the way we're looking at it is we're establishing a Department of Opportunity and Belonging and a Director of Opportunity and Belonging whose job it is to help all of us understand how to implement those things across so whether you are the custodial person or the professor or the president or the person in finance or the person in accessibility services, there will be the connection between all of those people. So it'll be an integrated way of looking at it. And our goal, I don't know if it'll work because we haven't implemented this yet. And certainly COVID was a bit of a distraction. But the goal is to have this integrated way of looking at it to improve our mutual accountability to one another. So that it isn't just your accessibility plan here and that it kind of exists floating in the air on its own. So that it would be, there would be a very clear set of accountabilities in relation to it, even if it isn't here by legislation, that we would have a way of mapping that. And that's one example of it, but there would be other things too.
I'm really enjoying the themes of accountability, education. You know, we say continuing education, you know, professional development. We use those terms, but to truly, you know, to education of faculty. You know, we keep going from big picture to small picture, and I think that's fascinating. And I'm going to take one more question from the chat box here, and it's looking for supports. I'm unsure because possibly depending where you are, each institution is different. But the individual asks, what advice do you have for students starting up social media and a society page in university that is lacking in terms of accessibility during COVID? Okay, so I'm taking this to mean that the university's social media and society page is not accessible, and we are social distancing right now, and they may not, so that's why the COVID. I'm a self-advocate, and I've always wanted to give back to bridge the gap between students and departments and make resources accessible for everyone, to show students what resources are available to students. What are the top 3 advice tips you would have? I've been attending the conference all week to educate myself, so I'm well-rounded. I'm super passionate. Love your talk, Aoife. So I believe this may be more of a question that can be answered through, like I think Jacqueline mentioned, there are, it sounds to me like perhaps a technology issue, and in terms of making the assistive technology, or making social media, or the online life of the university more accessible. I guess we can't forget the importance of accessibility in it, and especially now because of COVID, accessibility in terms of internet and online, and being able to access classes and social media and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure what each of your individual institutions have done in response to beefing that up in terms of COVID, but anybody willing to take that on?
I can speak a little bit. I'll start and let everyone else take, because I don't have a lot to say, but I have something. NASCA didn't. I'm going to start by online learning, because we're fresh to this. This is not a space we've ever occupied before, so we're going at it fresh, and we are going at it from the perspective of inclusive learning and inclusive design, because it's never happened before. So we're working with education technologists, instructional designers, who are collaborating with faculty, students, and staff to make these inclusive learning spaces, and they're in production at the moment. And we're certainly thinking about that and doing it with that in mind. We do recognize that the first iteration of these will be works in progress, and we will be looking for feedback on how they perform well and where we need to continue to tweak. And so the disability community, for want of a better phrase, we will be reaching out to you for feedback on our courses, which will be going up in about 2 weeks' time for the first time. And it'll be really important for us to get feedback on those, on lots of different axes around disability, because it's a very important focus for us, and we're really interested in how well we've done, where we need to improve, and the opportunities for change. We think that this is, for us, one of the most exciting opportunities to bridge some of that divide. So we think that between blended and online, if we get it right, there's all sorts, even things like space, people for whom getting to the campus is always good, whether or not you had physical accessibility or not, it was still always going to be a problem. People, different types of disability, whether you're, chronic illness, all sorts of things mean that, well, we all know that. So at least having some level of online and blended opportunities makes us optimistic about our capacity to be more inclusive, but we do have to do that mindfully and thoughtfully. So yes, we would love feedback from everyone on how we're doing on that.
Thank you.
That's my little bit.
Thank you. Ian, can you give us an update on what's going on with Acadia, and is it full online this fall, or?
My understanding is that they're going to try a hybrid, so some online and some in person potentially. I'm not sure if they've officially made the announcement, but they are going for a hybrid model. Yeah, it's a tough question in terms of, when a university doesn't have the infrastructure and they choose not to, or they don't for whatever reason have accessible online format. I think that's going to be a major challenge. We don't often think about accessibility online as much as I think we should, and that's, I think, I'm not sure that I have great advice per se, but what I would suggest is we can push this issue. I think it's a huge gap. and we do need to get better as institutions to address that. Particularly, I think, you know, we sort of, many institutions have been pushed into this position where they're not traditionally online schools, and now all of a sudden they have to be. But yeah, and also the yeah. So in terms of the societies, so is the question around social media, creating a social media page?
I think it's around, I believe it's around accessibility in terms of, I'd like to assume, or I'm going to assume that it's around just accessibility and technology, you know, and I think that, you know, we are sort of, a lot of us have been, or a lot of places have been sort of pushed into this now because of COVID, although I want to acknowledge that it's something that many people with disabilities, who identify with disabilities, have been pushing for a long time, right? But I just wonder if it's something that we can, you know, it's so, like, it was an excellent point, Ian, when you said we often forget about accessibility of online, because it's easy to identify a missing wheelchair ramp, but people forget that our online world needs to be accessible as well.
And I think when you adopt a philosophy of accessibility, or a mindset of accessibility rather than piecemeal, things start to fall together a little bit better. You know, one example that always stuck with me was way back in the day when I was doing work with CNIB. There was a man who said that, you know, curb cuts for wheelchairs are great unless you have low vision, in which case you can't actually feel the curb anymore with your cane. And so it's sort of that, the idea that accessibility is not about one-off things. It's not about this technology or that technology will solve anything. It really is a mindset. And even touching on the little bit about awareness as well, if developing awareness, I think, is about developing awareness of accessibility and disability as a way of viewing the world, as a way to make the world more inclusive place, and making campuses more an inclusive place.
Thank you for that. I don't want to keep you much longer. We've been at this for about an hour and a half, and I feel like, you know, we could just keep talking. It's an unending well of you know, conversation potential. But I guess I'd like to ask sort of each of you, if you can give us a little bit of advice that you would have for an incoming student who may identify with having a disability of any kind, visible, non-visible, mental health, physical, cognitive, sensory, or be unsure if they have a disability, you know, and they're planning on attending a post-secondary institution soon, or in the fall, or next year, or 2 years from now. You know, what advice would you have for them as someone who is, you know, apprehensive about that? Can you start, Jacqueline?
Sure. I guess the first thing would be, when you mentioned somebody who's not sure they have a disability, I think a number of us kind of had that feeling going through school. You're like, something's different about me that, you know, isn't going on with some of the other students. When you come to university, it's not too late. It's not like you have to get diagnosed when you're 7. So if you feel maybe you have a learning disability, maybe you have ADHD, maybe you have autism, any disability for that matter, if you feel like, you know, that might be the case, it's a good idea to get tested. I have arranged for a lot of psych eds. We usually do a little screener first that gives a bit of an idea.
A psych ed is a psychoeducational test in order to determine whether you might have a learning disability or be learning impaired in some manner.
Yeah, and also they can do ADHD as well, but ADHD, interestingly, when it comes to funding, because a lot of these things come down to funding as well, you can't get a psych ed reimbursed if your diagnosis is ADHD. You can get a psych ed reimbursed if you have a learning disability, but sometimes you don't know which it is that you have. So that's a little bit of a catch. Doctors can diagnose ADHD, so you can also always go to your doctor if you think that's what it is.
Sorry, a quick question. I know a few years ago when you were doing psych ed tests, it would cover it 75% only if you got a positive result. So only if you had a learning disorder, and they wouldn't reimburse you if you came back negative. Is that still true?
So they have a little bit of a different program going right now, and that's where that screener comes in. So it's like, if I do the screener and it doesn't seem at all like somebody has a learning disability, but there might be something else going on. But if it doesn't seem like it's a learning disability, then we probably wouldn't go forward with a psych ed. We'd start investigating other things, like maybe it's a mental health issue, maybe it is ADHD, and then we would look at that. So I always encourage students, though, to investigate, if they feel like there's something that's affecting their education. That will definitely always help them with that. I'm trying to, what was sort of the rest of the question too?
Just that it was only covered or reimbursed 75% if it was positive.
Right.
So what happens if you're negative? Is there any way to get that reimbursed at all? Or I feel like that would be a barrier to people getting tested.
Definitely. So there's a program now. What I got into the pre-screener thing is that there's an LD bursary, so a learning disability bursary. So basically, you get the money up front to pay for it. So then you don't have to worry about the fact that it wasn't the result you were thinking, and you don't get that. But again, like, I'd be sort of irresponsible if I went through with that, and I really didn't think that was the case. I'd encourage a student to look at maybe some of the other options that are affecting them. And there's many things that can kind of mimic an LD or ADHD for that matter.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for asking, Katie. Ian, do you have any advice for someone just, thinking, oh, I'm going to be heading to Katie in the fall, and I'm apprehensive because I have a disability, or I think I might have a disability?
My main advice would be to connect early. It's always nice for someone who works in this area to connect with students early. So if you're starting in September, connecting in the end of July, and so that would be, start this, get the whole process in motion first. And
so you
start,
guys are there all summer working, COVID is, so you're not there, you may not be there, but it is accessible year round in order to say, hey, I'm a student that may be starting in 3 months or next year, or I want to come 2 years from now.
Yeah, even a heads up, is I've always personally thought that was a good, have an introductory is to the service, to the people, is really great. It sort of flags your name, and it gives us starts a conversation early. So starting a conversation early is really, really great idea. But the bigger thing and the more important thing, I think, is taking it as the adventure that it is, and really, dive in. Again, we talk about stigma. I really believe in disability pride as well. Really, it's really important to look at whether it's a learning disability or mental health issue. part of who you are. It maybe shapes a little bit how you learn, your perspective on life and your perspective on academics, and it can be really exciting. So starting the conversation early and really, start to enjoy yourself early.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I like the alluding to it as an adventure, because it is for everybody. Katie, any advice for people thinking about heading off to college or uni and think they may have a disability or know they have a disability?
Well, I have one very granular piece of advice, and then
we love that.
More broadly. But one thing a lot of people don't know when they have learning disabilities is that they have to be the psych ed had to be completed within 5 years of you attending university, or it's not considered up to date. So you will have to do it again. So if you can get that done before you actually enter school, that's very helpful. Because if you go in, you've had the same psych ed since you were in grade 5, it's not going to be useful to the people who are trying to make your accommodations. So just to note that, because a lot of people go in, they're like, oh, well, I've had a psych assessment since I was, 8. I don't need one. I am clear. And then it can delay services, or it can just interfere with getting registered properly if you don't do it in advance and things like that. So that's just my tiny granular piece of information.
But important.
Good.
Other than that, I think it's really important to just go in and kind of see yourself as a regular student. You're not alone, and there's a lot of programs, and it's just you go in and essentially they're like treat it like a business, like you're a customer and they are meant to adjust to your needs, kind of thing. You don't have to go in and say, oh, how am I going to get through this? It's, oh, how are they going to help me to overcome the barriers that they've created? Because you didn't create the barriers, they created the barriers and how they structured things. So you just have to go in and think about it as an adventure that you're going to take, as Ian said, and that you can go through the program and just as well as anybody else, as long as you consider your own needs and really know yourself well going into it.
Great, thank you. And there's lots of there's people online thanking you, Katie, for sharing your personal stories. So I just want to acknowledge that. Jacqueline, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just one quick thing. When you were talking about the psych eds, Katie was totally right in how that works, like within 5 years, unless your psych ed was done after you're 18. So if you're a more mature student and you're coming back,
yes,
then as long as it was when you were 18 and older. So sometimes if you want to get a psych ed done, if you can manage to wait till your 18th birthday, then it's going to last you forever.
Yes. Okay. Wow. Again, we're sort of navigating the barriers, and we should mention, in case anybody's listening, the particular barrier around psych ed is wait lists and a cost. It's fairly a lump of sum of money. Thank you. That's good advice, though. I didn't know that, Jacqueline. Thank you.
Mean your updated one, obviously, like if you need one when you're younger, that like get it. But when you're doing that high school updated one, if you can wait till after your 18th birthday, that's probably for the best.
Rather than doing it at 16 or 17, if you can wait till 18. Yeah. Aoife, any last words with our future students with any advice?
Well, a couple of things. I first will say that if you're coming to NSCAD and you have a disability, or you think you have a disability, you're coming to the right place, because there's no normal at NSCAD. So welcome.
I've heard that.
And so yeah, this is a great place to come. I think the other thing to think about with NSCAD as well is, and I'm sure this is the same for all of our universities here in Nova Scotia and in general, is that going to university isn't just something that we do as individuals. It's something that impacts all of our family. It often impacts our community, and we see ourselves as being there for the families and community too. So if before you come, if your family have questions, or if there are people in your community who you're close with have questions, we're here to answer them for them too. So if they want to know about facilities or resources, anything like that, don't be shy. You know, mammy, granny, whoever, put them on the phone, put them on Skype. We can give them a virtual tour. We're not shy. So that's a very real thing, because it's not just you. It is also other people's concerns. And that's a very real thing. So we really enjoy having families involved, and the same if there's other people that are close to you that have genuine concerns or questions, or who might be more helpful than you sometimes, because sometimes there's other people think about things that you might not, and you'd like to get them to advocate for you. So please don't ever hesitate about that. And then the other thing is, we are really small and we have only so many services and so on, but the thing that's happening at NASCAD that's really exciting, I think, and I've just had a note from our fantastic new dean who told me to remind everybody that we're fully exploring a whole new range of supports for students with disabilities, and very actively working with our students and also with faculty and staff to explore all sorts of new ways and new approaches to doing that. And I think I indicated in some of those ways that we can embed them across different parts of the university experience. And we'll be hoping, if you are coming to NASCAD, that you'll be helping us do that and making it work really well. So we're excited if you're coming. So look forward to seeing you.
I do also want to mention that should anybody watching have any particular questions that they'd like to address to Cape Breton University or Acadia or to NASCAD, the best way would be to perhaps go to the university website and find the accessibility services link, or
OSC, Office of Student Services at NASCAD.
Okay, Office of Student Services at NASCAD.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can contact me, President at NASCAD.
Well,
happy to answer.
Be careful what you'll get quite an inbox flow. So I won't keep you any longer. This has gone longer than I promised it would, but I feel like I'd love to keep taking questions and talking all afternoon. But I so appreciate your time and for you joining us during National Accessibility Week and being part of NAW and part of this panel. And if there's anything else anybody would like to mention before I let you all go and have a glass of water. Everyone's good? Okay. I tried my best to get to what was coming by in the chats, but hopefully nobody got missed. But if anything, we can connect with people later on. Reachability.org. You can contact us, and of course, Cape Breton University, Acadia, Aoife McNamara at NASCAD, and then Katie, but she might be not open to emails. So I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.